All the Young Judes by MsKingBean89, Chapter 11, First Year, Birthdays, Books and the Beatles. Fortunately, Madame Pomfrey was able to undo the hex with a few flicks of a wand. She still lectured all of them on the misuse of dangerous magic. As if we all wanted to look like Bigfoot, James complained as he left the hospital wing, skin still tinging from the hair growth. It had to be Severus. He coated the sweets in one of his potions, I know it, Sirius seethed. Yeah, we all know it, mate, James replied. Don't worry, we'll get him back. I'm so sorry, Peter wailed for about the 100th time. I really thought they were from my mum. It's fine, Peter, James patted his shoulder. Just wish you'd given them to us first thing on a Monday. Then we could have at least bunked off Transfiguration. I demand retribution, Sirius shouted, raising his wand dramatically. Remus laughed. James did too. And you shall have it, he replied, pushing his glasses back on his nose. Patience is a virtue, Black. Vengeance like this takes time. Don't suppose you've got any other brilliant ideas, Remus? Sorry, Remus shook his head. His heart was still pounding from the terror of it. If he'd had seen Snape at the moment, he would have throttled him, never mind pranking him. I'll help you, James, Peter piped up. I'll do anything. I won't be scared this time. They were just turning the corner which led to Gryffindor Tower when somebody behind them called out, Sirius! All four boys turned. Sirius made a small shocked noise. It was Bellatrix Black. What do you want? He asked, looking down and scuffing his shoes on the flagstone floor. It was the most unserious posture imaginable, Remus thought. He also noticed that James stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with his friend. Come here and address me properly, the 7th-year witch snapped in response. Sirius didn't move. Bellatrix withdrew her wand. Remus was shocked, and for the first time since he'd been at Hogwarts, he felt frightened. Come here, she said in a low voice, or I'll make you, and it won't be a little childish hair-growth charm, I promise. Sirius walked forward, shaking his head at James, who tried to follow. They all watched the cousins speak in quiet voices at the end of the hallway for long, uncomfortable minutes. Sirius barely looked up from the ground the whole time. Finally, she patted him on the head, and then turned to reel and left. They all exhaled, relieved. Sirius walked back to them shakily. In silence, they all entered the portrait hall and sat down on the usual sofa. All right, Sirius? James asked first. Yeah, he nodded, looking paler than usual. She wanted to invite me for tea on my birthday. I think my mother must have made her. Probably held a family conference. Try to bring me back into the fold. Just because you're in a different house. And the company I'm keeping, he smirked at them all. So when's your birthday? 2 weeks, the 3rd. I have to go to this tea though. Bella's not joking about knowing some really vile curses. We'll do something afterwards then. Something good, yeah? Peter and Remus nodded enthusiastically, but in the back of Remus's mind he remembered that the 3rd was the night of the full moon. Sirius turned 12 and Remus wasn't there to celebrate it, though he didn't think anyone minded. James was Sirius's best friend, after all, and Peter still liked to think that James belonged to him a little bit too. So Remus would have been the odd one out, even if he hadn't been locked away in a shack trying to tear himself apart. Madame Pomfrey tried him with a sleeping draught this time, before the moon rose, but it apparently had no effect. What was worse, he managed to give himself his biggest scar yet, right across his back. Pomfrey made him stay in the hospital wing all day afterwards, which was actually fortuitous. It meant that he could just tell his friends that he'd been suddenly taken ill. They were still a bit confused as to why he hadn't told them beforehand about feeling sick, but they went along with it. They probably already thought he was fairly odd, and by now they accepted mostly anything that he told them. He wouldn't have enjoyed the birthday. James talked to Madame Mooch and arranged a lunchtime flying session for the 3 of them. After dinner, before Sirius had to go and change for tea with his cousins, James and Peter led the Gryffindor table in a round of happy birthday, followed by, for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. According to the students Remus heard from afterwards, they sung, and so say all of us, over and over, getting louder each time, until Professor McGonagall had to threaten them with detention if they didn't stop. As November marched on, the days grew shorter and the castle darker. They spent less of their time outside and more of it huddled by the fire in the common room, playing card games and plotting revenge against Snape. The first term was drawing to a close, and the teachers seemed to be piling on more homework than ever. Whenever Sirius and Remus were away from Peter and James, usually when the other two were in the library, Sirius was reading to them. They finished the history of magic in just under 2 weeks, and they alternated between a beginner's guide to transfiguration and magical draughts and potions for the rest of the term. When the Marauders worked on their homework as a group, he even took to read it aloud, as if to himself, claiming it helped him think. This was very much to James's annoyance, who preferred silence. Though they couldn't possibly cover the entire syllabus in such a short time, to everyone's amazement, including his own, Remus's marks were improving at an astonishing rate. Sirius had apparently had the right idea. Remus's ability to retain and recall information was remarkable, and he found himself raising his hand in lessons for the first time in his life. Sirius's marks, on the other hand, began to fall. He spent so much time trying to secretly assist Remus that he apparently no longer did any of the extra reading he had prided himself on all year. As it was, his own homework became average, passable, and he fell behind James for the first time. James was oblivious, of course, and merely assumed that he was actually improving. "But you spend so much time in the library," Remus whispered to him once, after Sirius had received an acceptable mark on his charms essay. "I thought you were studying." Remus himself had still not worked up the courage to visit the library. The thought of all those books horrified him. "I am studying," Sirius replied cheerfully, "just not this stuff." He folded his essay away. "I'm looking up cognitive interpretation spells, so you can read by yourself. It's really tricky. Owl level, actually, but I think I've almost got it." "Don't worry, Lupin. It's not as if I'm failing. This is much more interesting anyway." Remus felt horribly guilty, of course, as well as mildly ashamed that Sirius was devoting so much time to helping him. He honestly could not remember a time in his life that anyone had ever tried so hard on his behalf. It made him wish he could do something, anything in return. But other than having a difficult family, Sirius Black seemed to want for nothing at all. In fact, there was one thing Remus could give Sirius which James could not, but hardly felt worth mentioning. Something Sirius called Muggle insight. It began when Remus plucked up the courage to ask about Sirius's recollection. Sirius was only too happy to share. Other than his racing broom, which was still at home, his albums were his dearest possessions. Remus could easily see why. He had Introducing the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, and Help, as well as Abbey Road, Beggar's Banquet, and Sticky Fingers. "Mick Jagger has to be the coolest muggle I've ever seen," Sirius gushed. 2 Led Zeppelin albums. Remus hadn't listened to them before, but all the older boys at St. Edmund's were all obsessed. And a Simon and Garfunkel LP hidden at the back. Wizards, it turned out, did not generally think much about muggle music. All of Sirius's records had been gifted to him by his cousin, Andromeda, who was apparently the first black sheep of the Black family, having left school a few years before and had married a muggle. "I hardly ever see her," Sirius explained, "not since the wedding, but she posted these to me every now and then. She sends them the muggle way so Mum doesn't find out. She doesn't understand how the post office works." So although he had an impressive collection by any 11-year-old standards, Sirius's musical passions existed almost entirely in a vacuum. He wasn't aware of any of the other Beatles songs other than the ones that he already had pressed into vinyl. He'd never listened to the radio or watched Top Pops or even a copy of NME before. As such, he found Remus endlessly fascinating on the subject of music and muggle culture. "You've actually seen them, though," he said, awed. "You've seen them performing." "Not in real life or anything," Remus replied uncomfortably. "No, I know, on the telephone," Sirius nodded sagely. Remus stifled laughter. "On the television," he corrected. "It's more like those moving paintings you lot have, only black and white. And only the Beatles. The Stones came on once and Matron made us turn it off because of the hair." "What about their hair?" "Too long," Remus shrugged. "She said they looked dirty." "My hair's much longer," Sirius said, frowning. "Yeah, it is, but muggle boys don't have long hair. Not normally." "Don't tell him that," Peter teased. "He'll shave his head." He threw a gobstone across the board on the floor. They'd been playing a lazy game off and on for the past few days, trying to teach Remus the rules. It rolled onto one of Sirius's stones and knocked it out of the ring, immediately squirting out a disgusting-smelling liquid, which Sirius barely dodged in time. Peter grinned. "Ha! Take that, muggle lover!" Sirius swore loudly, enough to change his clothes.